In this video, I'm going to go over mirroring. Mirroring is a really powerful tool in Maya, and in the future, when you model on objects, you're going to find that you're going to be using this tool a lot. Because many times, especially in very industrial objects, you'll basically model one side of an object, and then you'll mirror it over. You may make modifications on the other side, especially if you're doing character modeling. You probably won't want perfectly symmetrical models. But when you first model it, to keep all the polygons and edge loops and the counts and everything like that exact, you'll most likely be modeling on one side of the model. Or there's a way you can model on the model, but having everything you do on one side reflect on the other. So I'm going to go over 3 different ways to deal with mirroring and how to do mirroring in Maya. At first, some of the stuff may seem a little tricky or unintuitive or unusual, but this video will be here, so you can just refer to this video and see which type of mirroring you want to use. So the first one is the oldest, most traditional way of mirroring. We've gone over this briefly in another lesson, and that's up here in Edit, and then in Duplicate Special. So Duplicate Special, you'll have seen one time I did this in another demo. We have a -1 scale. Now this one probably is one of the most unintuitive to most new students to Maya, but it did actually make sense because scaling in a negative direction is actually what you're doing, actually scaling opposite direction you're going. So the way to make this work is you also have to use this with the pivot tool. So I'm going to pick on this object. We're going to go through our whole typical process again. So I'll go to Move. Okay. Oops, I already have I already set the pivot for the side, but let me redo that. Okay, so if you ever pick on an object, also this is good to know too. If you happen to pick on an object and the pivot's in an unusual spot, then you can go to Center Pivot. Okay, so there we go. So now we have the pivot in its a center spot here. So generally what I like to do is this, because then you get to see it very apparently. So I'm going to move this. So I can either move this, I'm going to move this on the grid, so I can either pick this or I can type X, because I don't want the grid snap on all the time. Okay, so there we go. So there we go. Now I do want to move the pivot. So I'm going to move the pivot to the center point here. So I'm going to type D, which is for moving your pivots. And I'm going to hold down the X key so it snaps to grid. Okay. There we go. So now I'm going to type D again to get out of that mode. Okay. And I'm going to pick on this. And then I'm going to go to Edit, Duplicate Special. Now, normally when you go into a tool, I've always told everybody to reset it. So you reset it clean. So I would do Reset Settings. So now it's set up to be the default Maya setup, right? Structure. So you have to remember this, and this depends on which direction you want to mirror something. If you want to mirror it on the plane, side to side, that's in your X direction. If you want to mirror it up, if you want to make something go up, then that would be in your Y direction. And if you want to mirror it back into the camera, it would be in -1 direction that way. So I'm going to type number 1 here. I mean a negative. Okay. So now I'm going to hit Apply. And now, if you see, let me close this up. What's happened is this scaled this object and made a duplicate in the negative direction. Okay. So that's how that works. And you always have to remember the pivot. And the pivot, this also will come in handy later because you will also use that tool for other things, or making arrays of objects. All right, but this is how you would mirror an object by using, this is the oldest, most traditional way that existed in Maya, going back, almost 20 years. Okay, so now I'm going to delete this. And I'm going to reset everything. So I'm going to keep going through these tools just to keep people remembering. So I would go to Center Pivot, and then I would move it. So I would type X to hold on for Grid Snap. Okay, there we go. All right, so now the next method would be actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it to the midplane here. So I'm going to go through the whole process again, but this time I'm going to use that other methodology I've showed everybody. This is to get the pivot to be on the side of the object, okay? So now I'm going to type in D again, and then you're going to type in V. That's for point snap. So it's not going to snap to these points. We've gone over points before, vertices. It's not going to snap those points, but it is going to use them to calculate the direction where it has to go, or where it has to snap to. Okay, so now I have it on. I'm going to hold on the V key, and I'm going to pull on this here, and it's going to snap to that edge there. Okay, so always remember that trick. I've showed this a few times. This is a very handy trick for getting a pivot to go onto an edge. Okay, so now I'll type D. Okay, and now I'm going to type X to move it to the center point because oops, it's somehow it stayed in the D mode. There we go. Okay. There we go. Okay, now we're good. All right. So now, actually, I will stay in. Well, let me go to this viewport, and then I'll do a shift. Let me go to this port, do viewport, and you can see it. And then you'll see again later. I'll go to the front view. All right. So the next mirror is you go up to Edit Mesh. And let me look through. There's so many menus in here. No, it's actually in. Yeah, here it is. There's so many. Some of these menus here, and they move things around. So, if you go up into Mesh, you'll find Mirror here. Now, here's a time when you're going to need the dialog box. Okay, so you have to kind of pick on it explicitly. Okay, so this has a lot of controls. Don't get too worried about the controls right now. You'll learn more and more about Maya later. Right now, just use the default, but this will show you which axis you want to mirror on. So again, just the same thing. If you wanted to go up, you would use the y-axis. If you want to go back, you would use the z-axis, and then you're in the mirror directions. Well, generally negative, but it may not be. You might have a complex model that you've already been modeling on. Okay, so don't get too worried about these other things yet. And I'm gonna just go mirror. Okay, now you see. Now it's mirrored that object. So this is really great. So you just do all your modeling on one side of an object and then you just mirror it over. There's a whole bunch of little extra tools in here, but we're not going to deal with those right now. And I'm going to, now it's set. Okay. I'll put on wireframe here. So there you go. So now you'll see this is one object. Okay. All right. So now the next thing is, this isn't mirroring an object, but this is working with a mirror concept. When say you do have a full object, but you want to be modeling on both sides and you want to have it basically reflecting over on it. So let me turn on wireframe on all the views. I don't really need it, but anyway, so let me go into this window here. I somehow got into, let me go. Okay, here we go. All right, so now I'm in perspective view. So I've done a lesson on modeling toolkit. You may not have gotten to it yet, but when you do, go through all the steps. There's a whole bunch of videos on the modeling toolkit, which are very useful. So what I'm going to do now is in the modeling toolkit, I'm going to hit the tab on modeling toolkit. Okay, so now everything's set normal. So I was showing a lesson on how you would add an edge loop, a bunch of edges on an object. So that would be this tool here called multi-cut. So then what you would do is you would hit on the object, all right? And if you would cut it, then it's just going to do that there, unless this part here, okay? So I'm going to do Control Z, okay? So I don't want that to happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here, and there's a little selector here called Symmetry. So you can either do by object. Object is internal to the object. Well, I'm doing this on axis, so this is already on the axis. So you have to play around with these and decide which one you're using. But right now, I'm going to use the world over here. Okay. So now if I go back to multi-cut tool, oops. Yeah, now you'll see. See, so now it's reflected over there. Okay. And if I press enter, then that's set. Okay. So then you see now I would have both of these on both sides. Okay. So there you go. So that's kind of mirroring. We'll go over mirroring in much more detail on a future video. We'll do a whole bunch of models where everything's mirrored perfectly. But yeah, there you go. So that's that. So actually, you know what? Let me do one more. Let me do one more little example here. So now, see, now I can select everything. Everything I'm selecting here is mirrored. So I'm going to go. I deleted that. All right. So now what I'm going to do is let me do a kind of cleaner cut there. Let me go to multi-cut. Let me go. Oh yeah, here we go. So we're going to get a mid. In the video, I showed you how to do a mid cut. So this is a perfectly clean cut there. Okay, so this is perfect. So I used the control key when I had the control key on and used the mid mouse button. So then you have a perfectly mid cut there. Okay, so that's perfectly down the line. So if I went down to this view, you see now you have perfect lines there. Okay, so those are little tricks, you know, my modeling tricks. But there you go. That's mirroring. And now, so now all of a sudden too, let me show you one more thing. So say I wanted to now be individually modeling some of these polygon points. Let me do one more thing here. Let me do one multi-cut here. Okay, there we go. All right, just so we have some more geometry here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go pick my points. But now when I have this world X on, so I'm going to, let me get to the move tool. So now if I pick on that, you'll see it's just selected here, but you'll see it's going to reflect. Okay. So this becomes really powerful when you're modeling, if you're modeling a head or something like that, or like, you know, you have an object. Now you can just model on one side and it's getting an exact mirror copy on the other side. Okay. So yeah, mirroring super powerful. Okay. So there you go. We'll be trying these quite a bit. We'll be using them quite a bit on lessons, and yeah, on to modeling.